I had already decided I wouldn't cry at brunch even if the eggs came out rubbery and someone brought up my divorce like a weather report, but I didn't expect my mother to cut her grapefruit with the tiny butter knife they give you for jam, glance up at me, and say in a voice clear enough for two other tables to hear, "You're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I watched the tip of her knife slip, heard it click against the plate, and felt that quiet click land somewhere behind my ribs. It wasn't the first time she'd made generosity sound like a burden she alone carried, but it was the first time she aimed it like that. I set my coffee down so gently the saucer didn't rattle, and I told myself not to move because small movements become big ones when you're trying to keep a room from turning into a stage. It was the first Sunday of the month at a place in Plano that spells country with an unnecessary K on the menu and serves biscuits that taste like memory. Our family has been meeting there after church since before the Rangers changed stadiums. And the hostess knows my father's preference for a seat near the windows because he likes to watch the parking lot like it's TV. I'm 34, I run the testing center at a community college in Richardson, and I keep a clear desk and a quiet calendar. My mother calls it paperwork for a living because she can't quite say it's important. But when a student's financial aid sits in limbo and I get the right signature on the right line, people breathe easier, and that's enough for me. My sister Kendra arrived late with a baby hip on her hip and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father folded the paper place mat into quarters like the engineering school he never attended was still waiting on him, and my mother told the server, "2 carafes, 1 decaf," with the authority of a woman who believes if she stops moving the house will collapse. I had caught a segment on the local news before church, the anchor with the good hair talking about a garage sale fundraiser for the marching band 2 miles from my apartment and a quick update on the weekend's high school football scores. And the easy cruelty of that brunch comment felt jarringly louder than any of it, like a car alarm pulled inside. I didn't answer right away because the second you answer the wrong thing becomes the topic, so I buttered half a biscuit and let the butter melt into it, and then set it down without taking a bite. "What does that mean?" I asked, not softer and not louder, and my mother smiled at the server the way you smile at a flight attendant when you don't like turbulence. "It means you should be grateful people make space for you," she said, chin tipping toward my plate, because not everyone would. Kendra lifted the baby's spoon to distract her daughter and murmured, "Mom," like a correction you give a dog, and my father sighed through his nose and asked if anyone wanted to split pancakes, because he can manage a room if you let him order for it. I looked at the server, a young guy with a patchy beard and the patience of someone who has seen worse, and I felt heat run up the back of my neck the way it does when I think about saying the exact next necessary sentence. "If it's pity that gets me a chair, I'll stand," I said, and the server's eyes flicked to mine for half a second like he was checking if I needed water or a fire extinguisher. The plates arrived and the conversation swerved into Safe Lane's local news, who was bringing what to the church rummage next Saturday. Whether my father's shoulder would hold up through fall leaves raking or if he'd finally let Kendra's husband Jason come over with a good blower, but I could feel the new center of gravity at the table. I tried to relax my shoulders and get through the meal with the kind of dignity that doesn't play well in a dining room, and then the check came with a handwritten note on the bottom in a different pen that said, "Compassion discount applied, thank you. First Fellowship." And even though the dollar amount was small, the words weren't, and the pieces slid into place so fast I could almost hear them. "What's this?" I asked, sliding the bill toward my mother, letting the ink face her, and she did that thing where she pretends to read and then nods like she sees what she expected. "Our church partners with local restaurants to support families in transition," she said, butter knife back in her hand, voice smooth like radio, "and you shouldn't worry about it. It's a blessing." I pressed my thumb against the edge of the paper, felt the ridge of the receipt tape, and controlled my voice because I do that for a living. "I'm not in a transition. I'm in my life, I said, and my mother made a small motion with her shoulder that reads like shrugging if you don't speak her fluently. In the parking lot, I asked her directly because I've learned that indirect questions are the blanket people use when they want to be cold later. Have you been listing me as a recipient for the Church Compassion Fund? I said, steady, keys quiet in my hand. She looked at the top of my car like it had something written on it and said, the women's ministry needed a story for the brunch drive, and yours is compelling. Divorce, job that pays enough to look fine but not enough for comfort. Apartment that's not as safe as it could be. Pity unlocks wallets, and those wallets keep people in your position afloat. I felt my palm warm where it pressed against the door, and I lifted it away so I didn't leave a print. I'm not receiving anything, I said, and she gave me that smile that small-town queens give when you forget the steps. There are many kinds of help, she said, slipping her sunglasses back down. Not all of it passes through your hands. It's incredibly self-centered to think it should. She slid behind the wheel of her SUV and left before I could ask who exactly Pity was helping. That afternoon, I put the Rangers game on low because the cadence of baseball keeps my apartment steady, and I opened my laptop and logged into the church website because the world tells on itself if you ask it politely. The women's ministry page had a graphic for the Compassion Brunch at the very restaurant we'd just left, and a donate link that went to a third-party processor with a general fund drop-down and a note that said, memo line required for honoree. The last post on the church Facebook page showed 3 smiling ladies with foil pans of casseroles and a caption about blessing our dear Lauren as she navigates a tough season, and there was my face in a tiny square tucked beneath. From a photo Kendra took last summer at the lake, cropped so the water and my laugh looked like a fundraiser if you weren't careful. The comments were full of heart emojis and praying hands, and a few people mentioning they'd sent $25 or $50 for Lauren's rent cushion. And my stomach did that fast drop you get when a roller coaster turns after you've already committed to the seat. I read every comment and screenshot without shaking, then I closed the laptop without slamming it because I wasn't going to break my own things over their choices. I called my mother and asked her to come by before dinner because the sooner something ugly gets light on it, the less it grows. She arrived with a plastic container of cut cantaloupe that smelled faintly like onion because her fridge doesn't know boundaries, and she set it on my counter like an offering. I saw the Compassion Brunch post, I said, pointing my thumb at the closed laptop and the memo line that asks donors to name me so their money can feel personal. Tell me where those funds are going. She studied the fruit like she was deciding if it was ripe enough to save, then said, to the ministry, to needs. Do you want me to tell Roz and Paula and Sherry not to answer when the world is hurting? I stayed still because my body's instinct is to pace, and pacing looks like losing ground. What needs? I asked. Which bills were paid? Because my rent has been paid by me, my car note by me, my heat bill by me, and I'm holding receipts that didn't want Pity to help them. She rolled her eyes like she was the one tired of being asked to see the ground. Electric, she said, and when I didn't look away she added, and the box we made for the single mom from Kendra's salon when her daycare closed. We didn't have enough on hand, and the brunch did what it was supposed to. I'm not going to apologize for walking money from thicker wallets to thinner ones. I breathed in through my nose because if I pulled in more air than that I was going to say something I couldn't unsay. You used my name and my face, I said, and then you decided I didn't need any of it, so you gave it to someone else without asking me and called it a lesson in generosity. And at brunch today, you told me Pity goes a long way like you were giving me a pearl of wisdom I could wear. That night I called Kendra and she picked up on the second ring like she does when she's folding laundry and watching reality TV muted with captions. I need to ask you something without it turning into a shared secret that eats us, I said, and she turned off the TV because she has that in her. Did Mom talk to you about Using my story for the women's brunch, I asked, and there was a pause that carried cotton in it. She said it would help the fund if people felt like they knew the person, Kendra said, voice small, and I told her you wouldn't like it, and she said you don't like anything at first. I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder. I leaned against my counter and felt the cool laminate through my t-shirt. There's a note on the receipt from brunch today that says compassion discount. She's been using my name to get the church a discount and to get me a discounted seat at the table where I'm the lesson. Kendra made a sound like a tired laugh, and then it caught in her throat. She also asked me to share that photo from the lake, she said, because it made you look approachable, and even saying that now makes my skin feel too small. I'll tell her to take it down. I told her I loved her and that I wasn't mad at her because she had her own corners to keep clean and because she was already doing the right thing by not pretending this was air. On Tuesday after PTA at the college, where we call it something else, but the idea is the same, parents come with notepads and hope. I found an envelope tucked under my apartment door with my name written in my mother's tight cursive and my old nickname in parentheses, like she thought it might soften my first reaction. Inside was a copy of a spreadsheet printed from the church office labeled Compassion Brunch Receipts, September, with a column for donor names and amounts and a column that said honoree. And next to my name were 10 donations that added up to $540. There was also a handwritten list in my mother's pen that said paid, encore for Martinez family, $120, gas cards for Adam's twins' grandmother, $60, storage unit for Kendra's client, $180, diapers and wipes for church pantry, $80, reserve for December coats, $100, and at the bottom, this is what pity can do. I rubbed my thumb over the ink like maybe the letters would smudge and give me a different sentence. You made me the hook for your fishing line, I said out loud to my empty kitchen, and I heard my own voice and didn't recognize it. It sounded like someone who had stopped believing she could talk her way into reason and decided to document her way there instead. Wednesday morning, I stopped by the church office before work with a dozen donuts because sugar opens doors, and I asked to speak to the treasurer in a voice that didn't apologize for taking up space. Marcy, the treasurer, is a retired math teacher with a jawline that doesn't care about your feelings and a closet full of denim shirts with small embroidered pumpkins for October. She scanned the spreadsheet I brought and then opened a different one on her desktop and frowned. I haven't seen this version, she said, tapping the column headers. Ours looks different. We don't track honoree, we track designated for, which is a different animal entirely. She printed 2 pages and slid them to me across the counter like the librarian she once was, and on the official sheet the donations were there, but the designation column held a different word, Wilson Small Group, Community Needs. That's your mother's team, Marcy said, adjusting her readers. We reimburse purchases with receipts from that group. We don't pay vendors directly unless it's a crisis. I asked her if the church usually used a named person's photo without asking. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. We don't ask enough, she said, and her voice was softer than the numbers would have suggested. We assume family gives consent because family keeps drama small, and we save our policy voice for when the light bulb over the organ dies. Thursday evening, there was a knock on my door that sounded like someone trying to be polite with urgency, and when I opened it, Kendra stood there with a folder and an expression like someone who found the missing piece and wasn't sure what to do with it. She held out a black spiral-bound handbook with First Fellowship Women's Ministry on the front and a section flagged with a sticky note. The page was titled Storytelling Guidelines. The paragraph was short and too certain. It said, when a family resists sharing details, introduce their situation with humility using publicly available information and lean on the broader theme, loss, transition, crisis. Do not delay ministry for permission. People in need often cannot see their need. Kendra shook her head slowly while I read, and I could feel my face heat from collarbone to cheek. I didn't know about this until Marcy sent me to the storage room, she said. She told me to bring it to you because she can't change policy without proof of policy. I sat at my small table and put the booklet next to my light bill and the grocery list and the envelope I use for cash on weeks when a credit swipe will make me feel like I'm not counting right. This is the part where I'm supposed to either blow this up or swallow it, I said. I'm not doing either. I'm going to make them see what it looks like on paper, and then I'm going to give them a way to fix it without pretending it was a misunderstanding. On the last Thursday before payday, my mother left me a voicemail in a tone that said she thought she was being reasonable and wanted a prize. Honey, I've been told you're making waves, she said, like waves were a budget line item, and I need you to keep perspective. The brunch did good, and you were part of that good. Don't take it personally that you weren't the beneficiary. That's small. If you need help, you know all you have to do is ask. I stood in my kitchen and counted backward from 60 like I tell anxious students to do when the room feels like it's shrinking, and then I called the pastor's assistant and asked to be put on the agenda for Sunday's council meeting. Not because I wanted to make church into a courtroom, but because I needed them to hear a sentence said out loud. You cannot turn a person into a fundraiser without their consent and then call it pity. The assistant's voice warmed and she slotted me after the budget update and before the youth ski trip discussion, and I thanked her with my whole throat. Friday night, the Rangers were on TV with the kind of game that lets you fold laundry and pay the water bill and still not miss the good part, and my phone buzzed with a text from a number saved as Mary Rummage Sale. Mary is 70 if she's a day and knows every closet in the neighborhood. She wrote that someone had dropped off 4 bags labeled for Lauren's move, and she wanted to confirm what apartment to send them to because she didn't like to leave things on porches. I told her thank you and that I wouldn't be taking any donations, and she replied with a sad face and a line about hoping I found an affordable place in a safer complex with gates. I stood very still in my living room and let that sentence pass through me without letting it stick, and then I sent Mary a kind reply with a clear correction. I'm not moving. I'm safe. Please donate those items to the shelter on 15th Street. After I set the phone down, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore, not because I was over it, but because I had decided what to do with it, and deciding is the opposite of shaking in my world. By the second weekend, the rummage sale tables covered the fellowship hall like people who had a lot to say and too little time to say it. I walked through with Kendra and let her buy my father a used tackle box because he likes small compartments, and carried my own small bag with a novel and a flower vase I didn't need. The air smelled like old fabric and coffee, and the church's local news reporter was there with a handheld camera doing a cheerful segment for the Saturday morning show, and you could feel how a story would be written without you if you didn't tell it yourself. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to be present when the truth needed a person holding it. When we passed the table with kitchen gadgets, my mother looked up from her square card reader and gave me a smile that read like a note to the room, and I nodded because nodding costs less than anything else. At noon, while the teenagers hauled unsold lamps back to a corner, Marcy found me near the coffee urn and said, "Sunday at 2, you'll have 10 minutes. Keep it simple. Bring that handbook." I told her I would, and she patted my elbow in the way women do when they need to tell you you're not crazy without saying the word out loud. Sunday came with that hard North Texas light that turns parking lots into mirrors, and after church I sat at the council table with a copy of the handbook, the screenshot of my face under the compassion post, the brunch receipt with the discount, and a letter I typed Saturday night that read like I was my own advocate, because I was. The pastor looked tired in the way pastors look in October, and the head of the women's ministry, Roz, folded her hands like she had rehearsed the correct shape. When I spoke, I kept my voice even and my sentences whole. You used my name and photo without consent to raise money for a general fund that then honored me only in a discount and in the idea that my need is a useful story, I said. You made pity the tool and then wielded it in my presence to keep me small. I am asking you to put in writing a policy that requires written consent before any person is used as an illustration for fundraising, even if you think you know them better than they know themselves. I want a public correction on the compassion post clarifying that the funds go to general community needs unless otherwise designated, and I want any discounts obtained under my name to be reimbursed to the business by this church. I laid the handbook down and tapped the line Kendra had flagged. Roz's cheeks went blotchy, and she opened her mouth and closed it. The pastor cleared his throat and said policy could be written and that it should have been already, and Marcy made a note with a pencil like she was grading. That could have been the end of Act 1 if life were generous with clean edges, but while we were there my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number and a photo I didn't have context for. My mother standing in the line at the pharmacy with a church envelope in her hand, the caption reading, "Thought you should see where the brunch money goes. She pays down her cards and calls it ministry." I didn't react at the table because reacting publicly is a flavor of regret I'm not willing to taste anymore. I sat in my car afterward with the air conditioning on my face and scrolled, and there were 3 more photos in the thread. One of my mother swiping that white envelope on a self-checkout with a gift card, one of her at the tire shop with paperwork that looked like financing, one of a receipt with a total that could have been anything. The number signed itself C, and when I asked who that was, the reply came back, "Call me Kara. We've never met. I used to be on Wilson's small group until I realized my gas money was paying for someone else's pity tour." I felt my stomach settle into a heavy quiet that wasn't panic and wasn't peace. It was the beginning of a map. Kara and I met on the Tuesday after PTA at a coffee shop 2 miles from my apartment where the air always smells like cinnamon even when no one orders anything sweet. And she came in wearing a cardigan like armor and set her phone face down between us like she was giving me a choice. She used to teach Sunday school with my mother before she moved to a different small group, and she didn't waste time on chit-chat. She said she left Wilson's group in August because she didn't like how the storytelling bled into fundraising and the fundraising bled into favors, and the favors had begun to look more like coupons for influence than bread on a neighbor's table. She slid me screenshots after I nodded once. Reimbursements labeled Compassion Meal Lauren, when the merchant was a tire shop out on Spring Creek, a photo of the card reader at the brunch restaurant with a note, "Discount applied, Lauren W." A text from my mother telling the group to keep stories simple, details spook skittish donors. The edge of my paper cup left a damp circle on the table, and I wiped it with my sleeve because the napkin dispenser was empty and I needed to do something with my hands while words rearranged my insides. I asked her how long the honorary discount thing had been going on, and she said at least since summer when a different family's eviction notice drove a lot of giving, and I held her eyes and asked if those funds had gone to that family, and she said yes for the deposit. But the rest went to community needs, and my name was just the coat people hung their wallet on. "I don't think anyone thought they were stealing," she said, voice low. "I think they liked being in charge of the narrative and forgot the person at the center could hear." When I got home, I stacked the church handbook, the screenshots, and my printed copy of Aunt Rita's letter to me from a different messy month years ago, the one where she told me to keep my back straight and my head quiet. Then I opened my laptop and wrote an email to the council chair summarizing what I would be bringing Sunday, so no one could say I had ambushed them. I added 2 sentences that made my throat sting to type. The kind that feel like you're pressing your fingerprints into something. Wet, that my name had been used for discounts and posts without consent, and that my consent would never have been given if asked. I sent a second email to the brunch restaurant manager asking for an invoice for any discounted meals tied to my name. She wrote back within an hour with an apology that wasn't hers to make and a note that the discount totaled $112 across 2 events, which isn't a fortune, but also isn't nothing. And she said she would gladly accept reimbursement from the church and liked being asked directly. I sent a third message to the church's treasurer with that invoice attached and the words, "Please arrange reimbursement," and for the first time all week my shoulders relaxed for a whole minute because a small piece of the math had finally lined up the way math is supposed to. I didn't plan to see my mother before Sunday, but she has a talent for turning up at the precise moment you think you've learned how to avoid her. Thursday after work, I found her standing by my door with a grocery bag filled with pantry items she must have grabbed without a list: 2 cans of pumpkin, a box of stuffing, a jar of olives, things you bring when you want to look nurturing but don't want to cook. "I've been thinking," she said, stepping into my living room before I could say whether that was okay, "and I don't like the word pity either. I prefer mercy." I put the bag on the counter and watched her peel off her cardigan like she owned the room's air. "Return the cardigan to the Word," I said, trying to keep my voice level, because I'm not interested in wearing it. She told me she'd heard I was planning to speak at council with documents, her mouth pulling the word into something sticky, and that she hoped I wouldn't embarrass the ministry when the holidays were coming and people got twitchy about money. I said the only embarrassing thing was that I had to ask the church to put in writing that faces aren't fundraisers without consent. She inhaled like she was bracing for choppy water and then said, conversational as a weather report, that if I went forward with this there would be fallout I didn't see coming because donors don't like being told they're wrong. I looked at her hands because her rings always tell the truth. She was twisting the band my father bought her at a pawn shop the year after Kendra was born, and she only touches it when she's trying to pull focus off the thing that matters. "The thing I see coming is me keeping my name," I said, and the sentence sounded simple and strong in the room in a way I needed it to. Friday at lunch, the treasurer called to say the council would move my item to the top of the agenda and that the pastor had asked Roz to bring a draft consent form so we could hammer language while the iron was hot. She also said a member had lodged a concern with the church secretary about conflict on church property and asked me to confirm I hadn't yelled or made a scene at the rummage sale. I told her I had not raised my voice and had purchased a vase and a novel and a tackle box, and she laughed in that weary way people laugh when they are relieved to find the grown-ups in the room. 2 hours later, while I was proctoring a makeup exam for a student with an accommodation letter that could have been written by me in another life, my phone vibrated with the tone I set for unknown numbers and the message preview that makes your stomach tighten even before your eyes read it. "This is Officer Hernandez. We received a request for a wellness check for you. Are you available to speak?" I stepped into the hallway and called him back with my voice calm because I needed him to hear it. He said someone identifying herself as a close relative called to say I'd been erratic, crying in public at church, threatening to harm reputations, and they wanted to make sure I was safe. He asked if he could send a car or if a phone conversation would satisfy the report. I told him I was at work, that I appreciated his call, that I was not in any danger, and that I was involved in a policy dispute with my church that had spilled into feelings. He thanked me for being direct and asked if I wanted him to list the call as resolved with no further action. I asked him to do that and to note my employment and location at the time for the record. When I hung up, I leaned my forehead against the cool cinder block wall and took 3 deep breaths because I needed to mark the line between escalation and my own pulse. Saturday morning, the local news ran a feel-good piece about the band's garage sale fundraiser, and there I was in the background for 2 seconds carrying a box of paperbacks with Kendra, my face neutral and ordinary and not the least bit erratic. And I took a small, silly comfort in that because sometimes you need a stranger's camera to hold a frame for you. Kendra came over in the afternoon with her daughter, who ate a banana on my couch and left tiny fingerprints on my coffee table that made me smile in spite of everything. Kendra said Mom had been calling her hourly with new versions of what I was planning. First, I was suing the church. Then I was trying to get Roz fired. Then I was starting my own ministry sponsored by the community college, which made me laugh out loud in a way that startled the baby. Do you ever think she likes being the person in the room who knows where the money is going more than she likes it actually going anywhere? Kendra asked, voice quiet, and I appreciated that she had found a way to say something sharp without drawing blood. I told her Kara had texts and photos and a conscience, which is a combination you can do a lot with, and I asked her if she wanted to come to the council meeting and just sit. She said she did and that she'd bring fruit snacks because the meetings always run long and her blood sugar is a diva. Sunday afternoon, the council table felt less like a firing line and more like a potluck where everyone had brought paper instead of casseroles. I spoke first because the chair said I should, and I kept my sentences whole and my hands on the table so no one could say I was waving around ideas like a flag. I said my name had been used for discounts and donor appeals without consent, that a handbook page encouraged volunteers to introduce someone's story when the family resisted, that a portion of donor funds had been designated to a group without clear accountability for who made spending decisions, and that I wanted written policy requiring consent for names and images, a public correction on the compassion post about fund designations, a stop to the honorary discount practice, and reimbursement to any businesses that had applied it. I slid the screenshots and the restaurant invoice and the handbook page across the table and watched Marcy make check marks next to each item, like she was taking attendance. Roz said she was surprised to hear someone felt harmed by a practice that had blessed so many, and the pastor raised a hand in that quiet way pastors have when they're tired of hearing people call harm a misunderstanding. He said blessing and harm are not mutually exclusive, and that the latter shouldn't be the cost of the former, and Roz flushed and looked at her hands. My mother, seated at the back of the room despite not being on council because she never met a meeting she didn't want to steer from the second row, stood and said with serene clarity that my face had raised over $500 and that money had fed at least 2 families and bought coats that would keep little boys warm after Christmas, and that my insistence on permission sounded selfish when measured against cold fingers. The room did that subtle collective breath-in that happens when a sentence lands like a slap, and I waited long enough for the air to settle before I answered. You can keep boys warm without putting my name on their sleeves, I said. You can raise money without turning me into a parable. They took a 10-minute recess to confer on a draft policy Roz had brought that was 2 paragraphs long and as soft as the rolls at our Thanksgiving table. Marcy asked me and Kendra to step out for a minute, and in the small hallway outside the parlor I could hear my own heart beating and Kendra's fruit snack wrapper crinkling like a metronome. In that hallway, my phone buzzed again with a text from Kara, a photo of my mother at the tire shop yesterday with a Wilson small group envelope on the counter while a clerk ran a card, captioned "Tithe to Firestone." I swallowed hard because that looked like a stick of dynamite I didn't know how to hold, and I texted back, "Keep it. If it's the church's money, the treasurer will find it on paper. If it's hers, it's hers. I'm not the sheriff." The door opened and Marcy waved us back in, and the pastor read the policy in a calm voice that somehow didn't let anyone wriggle out of it. Consent in writing for names and images, designations made clear at the point of ask, reimbursements for any discount obtained using an individual's name without their explicit approval, quarterly reports from each small group on expenditures with receipts attached. Roz signed it without raising her eyes. The chair signed, the pastor signed, and Marcy handed me a copy like a receipt at a hardware store. It felt heavier than paper. I could have stopped there and called it a win, but a win without follow-through is just a break in the argument, so I slid a second envelope across the table. The one from the brunch restaurant with the $112 invoice attached and a stamped envelope addressed to them with "From First Fellowship Council" in Marcy's handwriting. The pastor nodded and said the council would reimburse immediately and add a note of apology, and I felt the first thread of something like relief tug free in my chest. My mother stood again and said this set a dangerous precedent where every story would require a permission slip and every permission slip would slow compassion, and the pastor said compassion is not speed. And I watched the way my mother's jaw tightened because losing speed is her least favorite thing. Kendra leaned toward me and whispered, "You didn't raise your voice once," and I nodded because that was one of my private goals, like drinking water during a meeting and not touching my face when I'm mad. We left with copies of the policy and a promise that the compassion post would be edited before dinner, and by the time I got home the caption had been changed to "Donations support community needs through Wilson Small Group." No funds are designated to individuals unless explicitly stated, and my photo was gone, replaced by a bowl of rolls that looked like they had accomplished more good in the world than half the words in the comments. I made pasta and watched the late game with the sound low, the announcers turning math into comfort, and I wrote a short note to Kara thanking her for being the kind of person who gathers facts before feelings. She sent back a heart and a sentence that said, "I left the group because of this, but I didn't leave the church. Don't let them narrate you out of your own pew, and I recognize the kind of advice that sits in your pocket until you need it." The next morning, last Monday before payday, I woke up to a text from my mother that read like a ceasefire wrapped in a dare. "I hope you're proud. You made policy, but you also made enemies. Don't expect me to clean that up for you." I put my phone face down and stood at the window while the garbage truck did its slow ballet on the street, and I decided my revenge would not be a victory lap or a public speech. It would be a series of small corrections that made it impossible to do the same harm twice. I drafted an email to the 3 restaurants that regularly host church events, explaining the new consent policy and asking them to remove any honorary discounts tied to names without signed permission. 2 replied by lunch with "understood," and 1 wrote, "We prefer invoices anyway, less drama," which made me smile into my coffee. I forwarded the wellness check incident number to the council chair in a short, factual note so it wouldn't be used as a story about my state. And I sent a message to the student I'd proctored last week telling him the way he asked for extra time had been exactly the right kind of brave, which is not related and also precisely related. By midweek, the new policy had quietly gone live, and the edit on the compassion post started to grow comments asking good questions that Roz answered with dates and receipts instead of hearts and anecdotes. And a strange calm settled behind my ribs where the earlier click had lodged. If you had told me a month ago that my revenge would look like a line on a spreadsheet and an apology note to a restaurant rather than a dramatic scene at brunch, I would have said that sounded boring. It turns out boring is the best feeling I've had in weeks. The ally I didn't expect, Kara with her cardigan and her screenshots, kept sending me small proof that truth had a longer tail than gossip. A PDF of the quarterly template Marcy rolled out to small group leads with bold font over the receipts required. Line, a draft flyer for the coat drive that didn't use anyone's face at all. A scanned copy of my mother's resignation note from coordinating the next brunch due to other commitments, which Kara sent only after I said yes twice because she doesn't like to injure even when a paper cut is deserved. I didn't cheer. I made soup. I went to church the next Sunday and sat 2 rows behind my mother and did not leave during the closing hymn. And because stories don't live on policies alone, I waited for the next sharp thing to come out of a familiar mouth, the thing that would make Act 4 look like a hill steeper than the rest, and ask me if I meant any of this when I said it out loud. The next sharp thing came on the 3rd Monday of the month. The kind of clear morning where the sky looks like it was wiped down overnight and the local news runs a feel-good piece about the marching band's new uniforms before shifting to a quick hit on gas prices and a reminder about early voting. I was packing my lunch, leftover pasta, in a plastic container that always smells faintly like last winter's soup, when my phone lit up with 3 messages in a row, then 6, then more than made sense for that hour. A woman from my old Bible study forwarded a screenshot of a mass email from Wilson Small Group Updates with the subject line, "A hard season, our response," and I read it twice to be sure I was seeing the same words in the same order. It said, "A member of our church family has chosen to make a private mercy public and misinterpretations have harmed a ministry," and then, without naming me, it named me, asking donors to pray for a young woman in transition whose pride has complicated our calling. By lunch it had hit a wider list, and my inbox felt like a beehive that someone had kicked. A cousin texted, "Call me, Mom says you're trying to get Roz fired," and a neighbor from the condo building asked very gently if I was moving to a safer place with gates, which told me the compassion post still had longer legs than the policy correction. I put my container in the staff fridge and stood for a full minute facing the bulletin board where student job postings curl at the corners, and I breathed like I was teaching someone else how to breathe. At noon I sat in my car with the AC adding noise to the kind my head was making and called the council chair because the only way to mute a rumor is to put a stamped letter where the whisper is. She picked up on the second ring and apologized before I could ask for anything. She had already seen the email, had already spoken to the pastor, and had already asked the secretary to pull sender logs because Wilson's small group did not have permission to use the church list. The email traced to my mother's login. It was Roz's content, but my mother had pushed send. The chair used a tired voice I recognized from teachers who used to wait me out when I was 8 and needed to finish a thought before I heard anyone else. She said a correction would go out by the end of the day and asked if I wanted my name on it or to keep it clinical. I told her to keep it clinical and include the policy link and the line, "No individual shall be represented without written consent," and I could hear her typing, every click a tiny weight adding up to something that would hold. "There will be fallout," she said, not as a threat, just a weather report, and I told her I already owned an umbrella. By late afternoon, after I had printed disability accommodation letters for 2 students and rescheduled a proctoring session for a kid whose grandmother was in the hospital, the correction went out. The subject line read, "Clarification, Compassion Communications," and it said what needed saying without calling it a scolding. "Unauthorized message, policy now in force, future updates through the office, appreciation for donors. Apology to anyone who felt misled." It was calm and dry and left no room for most kinds of drama. 10 minutes later my mother called, then Kendra, then a number I didn't recognize that I let go to voicemail because the voice in my head needed to stop vibrating. My mother's message was short and crisp. "I didn't do anything wrong. This is persecution for doing the right thing faster than you liked. We will talk at dinner." I texted Kendra and told her I wasn't coming to dinner. Kendra sent a single dot back, then followed with, "Then I'm not either. Don't make me feel noble about it." I smiled at the steering wheel in the campus parking lot and then felt guilty for smiling because nothing was funny, and then decided I was allowed to have a face that didn't only do one thing. That should have been the top of the hill, and for a minute it felt like I could put both feet on something solid without testing it first, but the slope got slick in a way I didn't see coming. The next morning, the treasurer called and asked if she could stop by with a document that needed my signature because, in her words, it's easier to protect people with a paper trail than with a hug. She brought a cease and desist letter drafted by the church's counsel for the email list owner, not because they were going to sue my mother, but because they needed to draw a hard line with anyone who thought a click counted as permission. The copies had signature lines for the pastor, the chair, and a witness. She asked me to sign as the person whose name had been used, not as a plaintiff, but as a fact. My hand didn't shake when I signed, because I had been signing my own name for weeks now, and it finally felt like a steady act. As she left, she set a second envelope on my counter like someone putting down a sleeping baby, and told me she had moved up the quarterly review of small group receipts and that if anything looked odd, she'd be asking for reimbursement, and she used the word odd with the precision my job requires when I write extended time or quiet testing environment. I didn't ask what she had already seen because that wasn't my lane, and staying in my lane has saved more fights than it has started. The climax came at the worst possible time, which is how climaxes schedule themselves. It was the last Thursday before payday, and I had stopped at the grocery store near the stadium after work to pick up broth and onions because soup can keep you upright when other things don't. The Rangers game would start late, and I like to hear the pregame chatter about weather and rotations while I chop. In the produce aisle, I ran into Roz, which almost never happens because we don't shop the same hours, and she looked tired enough that I nearly asked if I could carry anything for her, even though she has never let anyone carry anything. "We're having a listening session Sunday," she said without hello, which told me this had been rehearsed. Women need to process the changes, and they feel hurt that you went around them to counsel. Mercy should have more room. I stood with my hand on a bag of yellow onions and kept my voice level because the store has good acoustics. "Policy belongs to council," I said. "I don't owe a listening session to anyone who used my face for fundraising without asking." She nodded like she'd expected that sentence and then leaned in a degree. "Your mother is saying you're trying to humiliate her," she said. "If you have anything to say that could make her step back without making her step down, now is the time." I told her I was not negotiating my mother's feelings in a grocery store, and that if the small groups wanted a session, I would send a written statement, and she could read it without commentary. She frowned like I had given her the wrong change, and we both picked onions. Sunday's meeting felt like a PTA assembly mixed with Thanksgiving prep. Folding chairs set up in the fellowship hall with a mic stand and a sign-in sheet people mostly ignored. There was coffee and sheet cake because church women will feed you while they argue with you. And I carried a water bottle because I've learned the hard way that my voice cracks when the room's air is too busy. The pastor opened with a prayer that carefully avoided words like pity and pride, then handed the mic to Roz, who talked about process and feelings and impact, and then told the room there would be time for comments from the floor. I had given her a single page to read out loud, and she did, eyes flat, voice steady, the words plain. "Consent is required. My name will not be used. Donors deserve clarity. Restaurant reimbursements have been sent. Policy exists now. Mercy is not speed." When she finished, a woman I barely know stood and asked with a smile if I couldn't be more generous with my image since it had already done so much good. Another asked if the new policy meant we would have to run every good deed through a lawyer. A third worried that this kind of thing is why people stop giving, and I watched heads nod in time with their favorite kinds of sentences. I was supposed to stay seated. It had been agreed that this was not about me speaking, and that lines had been drawn on purpose, so I wouldn't be baited into defending a boundary like it was an attack. But then my mother stood up near the back, didn't go to the mic, and spoke in her best living room voice to the whole room anyway, which she knows the room will always indulge. "I am sorry my daughter feels hurt, but I will not apologize for moving money from fat pockets to thin ones when temperatures are dropping," she said, and the room gave a murmur that sounded approving if your ears were not tuned to the difference between approval and relief. Pity gets a bad name, but sometimes pity is just a hand in your back when you can't stand up. She looked at me when she said it, even if she pretended she didn't. For a second the air felt too thick, and I thought I might cry in a room where I had promised myself I would not, and then my chest did that small click it does right before I choose what I can live with. I stood, walked to the mic slowly so no one could say I rushed, and kept both hands on the stand like it was a lectern in a classroom. I've heard a lot about mercy today, I said, and I could hear my voice hold the room without wobbling. Mercy without consent is control. You don't get to hang someone's life on a hook and call it ministry. If you want to give, give. Don't use a face that didn't agree to be the poster. I didn't look at my mother. I looked at the women whose hands were on checkbooks and casserole lids and said the line that decided how my name was going to live in this building. Going forward, no one at this church can use my name or my photo for appeals, discounts, or stories. If you can't raise money without me, maybe the money isn't what you're after. It felt like I had stepped off a curb I couldn't see, but when I sat down, my legs didn't shake. Kendra squeezed my hand under the chair line, and the pastor, to his credit, closed the meeting quickly with a prayer so short it could have been a good night. In the parking lot, two women I didn't expect, Cara, who had moved across the room like a chess piece the whole time, and Mary from the rummage sale, caught up to me. Mary said she had already put the Forlorn's Move bags in the shelter's donation bin, and that the woman at the desk had been very grateful and had asked for more blankets, and she would make that happen by Wednesday. Cara handed me a folded paper with 2 sentences on it, a draft of a very boring announcement for next Sunday's bulletin. Compassion donations fund community needs through Wilson Small Group, with receipts reported quarterly. No individual stories will be shared without written consent. I took the paper and felt like I had been given a warm compress after a long day. For a few days it felt like I had run a race I didn't train for and my body only remembered afterward. The local news chattered in the background about a lost dog found 3 miles from where it wandered and a city council vote on crosswalk repainting, and my apartment finally felt like a place again instead of a staging ground. My father called on Tuesday evening while the post-game show ran slow and asked in his tired, careful voice if he could bring over leftover chicken, because your fridge can't be mad at you if it's holding food. He said he knew I had embarrassed my mother in a room she likes and that this might be a long winter, and he also said that rooms need other faces sometimes, and mine had looked like mine, not like the one my mother uses for stories. You looked like you, he said. That's all I ever wanted in a room, even if it made other people uncomfortable. He set a foil-covered dish on my counter and kissed the top of my head in a way that took 20 years off both of us. The denouement didn't arrive with a trumpet. It arrived in small pieces that add up to a month you can recognize. The Compassion post stayed edited. The restaurant stopped using honorary discounts and started sending proper invoices. Marcy's quarterly report template went out with boldface under the receipts line, and the women who love clipboards loved it more than they thought they would. The next brunch flyer used a photo of a table with coffee cups and not a single person's face. It looked boring and safe, and like something I could show to a student without explaining the missing parts. My mother stepped back from Wilson's Small Group to focus on family, which meant she didn't stop commenting on everything but no longer had a key to the office supply cabinet, and there was quiet in places that had been loud. She didn't apologize, not at first, and I didn't push, because apologies given under duress are cardboard. 2 weeks later, she texted me on a Wednesday, the same day the garbage truck always gets there twice because the driver likes our block, and asked if I would meet her for coffee at a place halfway between the church and my apartment, a place that doesn't know either of our stories. I said yes because yes didn't cost my spine anything that day. She came without a cardigan even though the room was chilly because she wanted to look soft, and she ordered something with foam that she doesn't actually like because it feels nicer in the hand. She said she had been angry because control looks a lot like love when you're tired, and there is never enough time to do things the way you want, and that using my name felt like a shortcut she thought I owed her for the years she had done the long road. She said she had told herself that if the money went to Coates, the method was forgivable, and it turns out that wasn't a good enough math problem to win the day. She didn't ask me to forget. She asked me to go to church with her on Sunday, like regular people, to sit on this same pew like we were not a cautionary tale, but a family that gets lowercase letters again. I told her I would, with conditions I wrote down in my notes app while she watched. No photos of me for any reason, no stories told in a room where I'm sitting without my permission, no wellness checks when I'm at work. And any fundraiser I attend will be because I chose it, not because I was named into it. She nodded like she was trying the words on, and they fit in an unfamiliar way. One more thing, she said, and she pulled an envelope from her bag like a magician who doesn't know how to smile after the trick. Inside was a cashier's check to the church for $112, the restaurant reimbursements, and a photocopy of a receipt from the tire shop with reimbursed to Wilson Small Group, written across it in Marcy's precise hand. I wanted you to see it with paper, my mother said. You like paper? I said I like proof, and she laughed, a small one that didn't ask anyone else in the room to laugh with her. Kendra and I took the baby to the park the second Saturday of the next month, and we sat on a bench near the Little League field while the boys argued about a foul ball and a grandpa in a folding chair acted as if he had been appointed commissioner of a small universe. I told Kendra I wasn't planning to join a small group again for a while, that I would give money to the pantry directly and sign up for shifts stacking cans when my Saturdays made room, and she nodded like she had already assumed that for me. She said our mother had told her the listening session wasn't so bad, and that one of the women had said out loud that she felt relieved not to have to sell other people's lives. She could just ask for a check and then fold blankets. I liked hearing that, Kendra said. It felt like clean air. We watched the baby try to eat a leaf, and I fished it out of her mouth with the careful finger a mother uses even when she is not that child's mother, and I felt a little less tired than I had since the grapefruit brunch. I don't have a tidy bow to tie this with, because tidy isn't how our family does anything. My mother still says things like, mercy is messy, and I still answer consent is clear, and we will probably be saying those words to each other in one form or another when she is 80. I still go to brunch sometimes, and I still order the biscuits that taste like memory, and the receipt now says only what the food cost and what we left for the server, and it turns out the blank space at the bottom is a relief. The pastor preached a sermon one Sunday about telling the truth slowly enough that people can carry it, and I wrote that down in the margin of the bulletin with a pencil I found under the pew because I want to remember it when I'm tempted to bang on doors with facts. The baseball season wound down, and the announcers talked about winter ball in a tone that made you think time was more of a circle than a line, and in the evenings, sometimes I turn the game on low and make soup and don't look at my phone until the broth tastes right. If there is revenge in any of this, it's that people who liked telling my story out loud learned to keep their hands off my name without being dragged into the street, and that a policy that looked boring on paper now protects the next woman whose life looked useful to someone else. It's that a restaurant got its money back with a note that didn't make them feel like their kindness had been taken for granted, and a pantry got cans, and a coat drive got receipts, and I slept through the night twice in a row without waking up angry at a ceiling. My mother didn't become a new person. She became a person who uses the sign-up sheet instead of her contact list, and for now that's enough. On the last Friday before payday, I stopped by the marching band fundraiser because they were selling hot dogs in the school parking lot, and the announcer had a voice that made even ketchup sound festive. I dropped $20 in the jar without putting my name down for anything, and the kid with the cash box grinned at me like I had just made his shift a little easier. On the way home, I passed the brunch place and saw our usual table by the window empty for once, and for a second I pictured myself sitting there alone, with coffee and eggs, paying the bill with just my name and nothing attached to it but the total. I didn't go in. I drove home and put the game on low, and I stood at my sink with the window cracked while a neighbor's dog barked twice at a squirrel, and then gave up because even dogs have better things to do. I folded the council's policy copy back into my folder behind Aunt Rita's letter and wrote November quiet on the tab. That was enough of an ending for me.